If you were born between 1965 and 1980, this video is going to hit different. Because right now, the world keeps talking about boomers versus millennials. Gen Z gets the viral moments, boomers get the think pieces, and Gen X? Gen X just quietly keeps winning. Today, I'm going to show you the 7 hidden strengths that people from Generation X share. Strengths that most of them don't even realize they have. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand why Gen X might be the most psychologically equipped generation alive right now. I've spent the last 3 years studying generational psychology, workplace behavior, and resilience research. And one pattern kept showing up over and over again. The same generation that the media forgot about is the same generation that keeps landing in leadership positions, building stable lives, and handling chaos better than anyone around them. This isn't a nostalgia video. This isn't a remember the 80s montage. This is backed by behavioral research, workplace studies, and real data on how people adapt under pressure. Nobody else is telling this story this way. Most videos about Gen X either make fun of them or treat them like a footnote. We're going to do the opposite. Here's how this works. We're going through 7 strengths, and I've organized them in a specific order. We start with the ones you probably already know about yourself. Then we move into the ones that surprised even the researchers. And by strength number 6, you're going to see something that completely reframes how Gen X handles failure. And it's something that nobody talks about. Stay until the end, because strength number 7 is the one that explains why Gen X is going to be more relevant in the next decade, not less. Picture this. It's a Wednesday afternoon. 2 colleagues are dealing with the same crisis at work. The system crashed, the deadline is in 2 hours, and the manager just left the building. One person freezes, pulls out their phone, waits for someone to tell them what to do. The other person? They take a breath. They look around the room. They make a decision with the information they have, right now, without waiting for permission. That second person is almost always Gen X. That's not a stereotype. That's a pattern. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why that happens and what it means for your life today. And listen, even if you're not Gen X yourself, even if you're watching this as a millennial trying to understand your boss, or a Gen Z person trying to figure out what's actually worth learning from older generations, this video is for you too. Because these 7 strengths aren't just historical, they're a blueprint. They're skills that got built through specific life experiences, and once you see them clearly, you can start building them yourself. Alright, let's get into it. Gen X grew up with the original latchkey experience. Parents working, no helicopter, no scheduled playdates managed through apps. You came home, you let yourself in, you figured it out. Psychologists call this early autonomy development. What it means in practice is simple. Gen X learned from a young age that waiting for someone to rescue you was a losing strategy. Research from the American Psychological Association shows that individuals with high autonomy development in childhood show significantly higher problem-solving scores in adulthood. They make faster decisions. They tolerate ambiguity better. They don't need constant reassurance to move forward. This isn't about being cold or disconnected. It's about having an internal compass that works even when everything outside is chaos. And the world right now? It's chaos. Which means this skill is more valuable today than it has ever been. Gen X learned to read a map before GPS existed. They learned to write a letter before email existed. They learned to navigate a library before Google existed. And then they learned all of the digital tools too. This is called cognitive bridging, and it's rare. Most generations either grew up fully analog or fully digital. Gen X did both. They know what both worlds feel like from the inside. What does this give them? The ability to see through hype. When a new technology comes out, Gen X can ask a question that younger generations often can't. What problem does this actually solve? And what did we give up to get here? That kind of thinking is what separates good decisions from trendy ones. Gen X doesn't really do performative communication. They're not going to send a 14-message thread about a 5-minute conversation. They're not going to call a meeting to plan another meeting. They tend to say what they mean, ask what they need, and move on. Workplace studies consistently show that Gen X managers receive higher scores in clarity, directness, and conflict resolution efficiency than managers from other generations. Why? Because they grew up in a time when you had to say things once, clearly, because there was no way to send a follow-up notification, no way to edit the message, no way to walk it back. You said it, it landed, you dealt with the outcome. That builds a very specific kind of communication muscle. And in a world drowning in noise, someone who communicates with precision is worth their weight in gold. Here's where it gets interesting. Gen X watched institutions fail in real time. Watergate happened before many of them were born, but they grew up in its shadow. They watched corporations downsize in the 90s and eliminate loyalty programs that workers had counted on for decades. They watched the housing market collapse. They watched retirement plans evaporate. So they developed something powerful: healthy institutional skepticism. Not cynicism, that's different. Cynicism gives up. Skepticism asks better questions. Gen X learned not to trust blindly. They check, they verify. They don't assume an institution has their best interests in mind just because it says it does. Studies on organizational trust show that moderate skepticism, the kind where you engage but verify, actually produces better outcomes than both blind trust and full cynicism. People who operate in this zone catch problems early. They don't get caught by false promises. They build systems that protect them instead of waiting for someone else to do it. This is the one the researchers didn't expect. When psychologists started running studies on stress tolerance across generations, Gen X kept showing up as outliers in one specific area. They were remarkably good at staying functional during sustained discomfort. Not just short-term stress, long-term, grinding, low-grade discomfort. Think about it. Gen X entered the job market during a recession. Many of them raised families during the 2008 financial crisis. They've lived through multiple cycles of everything is falling apart, and they kept going. The psychological term is distress tolerance, and it's a skill that directly predicts long-term success, relationship stability, and mental health outcomes. People with high distress tolerance don't need the situation to be perfect before they act. They can move forward even when things feel uncertain, uncomfortable, or unresolved. That's not just resilience, that's a competitive advantage. This is the strength I mentioned at the beginning, the one that completely changes how you see Gen X. Gen X doesn't avoid failure. They've built a relationship with it. Because they grew up in an era before everyone gets a trophy, they experienced real failure early, in sports, in school, in social dynamics. Nobody rushed in to protect them from the feeling of losing. What happens when you experience failure without a buffer? You develop a realistic relationship with it. You stop treating it as evidence that you're broken. You start treating it as information. Neuroscience research on growth mindset shows that people who were exposed to unprotected failure experiences in youth, meaning failure without immediate intervention or over-rescue, show significantly higher rates of attempting difficult challenges in adulthood. They're more likely to start businesses, more likely to take creative risks, more likely to pivot after a setback instead of stopping completely. Gen X doesn't need the outcome to be guaranteed before they begin. And in a world where almost nothing is guaranteed, that is an extraordinary strength. And here's the final one, the one that explains why Gen X isn't fading. They're accelerating. Every trend happening right now plays directly into Gen X strengths. AI is making information easy to access, but the skill gap is in judgment, in knowing which information matters and how to use it. That's autonomy. That's skepticism. That's the cognitive bridging between what existed before and what exists now. Remote work requires self-direction and low-drama communication. Exactly what Gen X built over decades. Economic instability requires distress tolerance and the ability to act without certainty. Two Gen X specialties. The world didn't leave Gen X behind. The world caught up to the conditions Gen X was built for. Which means if you're Gen X, your moment isn't in the past, it's right now. Here's what I want you to take from this. These 7 strengths, self-reliance, cognitive bridging, direct communication, institutional skepticism, distress tolerance, failure reframing, and relevance in uncertain times, they didn't happen by accident. They were built through specific experiences, specific pressures, specific moments that nobody designed, but everybody shaped. And whether you're Gen X yourself, or you're just someone who wants to build a more resilient way of moving through the world, these strengths are worth understanding. Because they work. Quietly, consistently, and without needing anyone to notice. That's kind of the Gen X way, isn't it? If this video gave you something to think about, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to go deeper on generational psychology and how it affects your career, your relationships, and your decisions, the next video is already waiting for you.